Hi, everyone. I was sitting on the balcony of General Conference 19 and watching what was going on down there, and I realized that something just happened. The traditionalist plan passed, and it changed something in my heart and my soul. It was like I just moved my residence. And suddenly, I pulled out my computer and I started to blog. And as I wrote this blog, I began by saying, did you notice what just happened? A new baby was just born. And we were screaming and crying, at least I was, in agony, and we were moaning and groaning in the balcony and in shock and in horror that this was our church. And I can tell you that when you go through a delivery of birth, it kind of feels like all those things. I can tell you because I've experienced it. I know it hurts, it's painful. It's not fun to birth a new baby until the baby arrives. But then in my blog, I said, we just birthed a new baby, and did you notice that had happened? And I was speaking to myself that not only were we groaning, but really something good was coming out of this moment in General Conference 2019. So I went home and we were talking amongst ourselves in the Desert Southwest Conference, and there was a group of us that were talking about that moment, and someone said, the wineskin just bust open. And another person said, yeah, the colonial wineskin just bust open. And another person says, now it's time to reform our wineskin. And another person says, and we need new wine. You know, the old wineskin that we've been living in is like calcified bones. You know, calcified bones aren't good for you. They are brittle and they break easily. But we've been living in that calcified state for a long time. We've been living in a place where we can't find a way to get to an answer. We've been living in a state where we are local and we are global, but we can't figure out how to be both those things. We've had so many problems in our calcified wineskins, but that wineskin just bust open. And when it did, we have the ability to have new wineskins. And the new wineskins will be flexible, malleable, easily supple, and movable. The new wineskins will be simple, a structure that gives us the ability to run and to go forward. The new wineskin will have a simple structure where we can be who God is asking us to be in this time. So we've gotten rid of the old wineskins, and now we have new wineskin. But also we have to think about what is the new wine that God is giving to us in this time. So the new wine is full-bodied. Full-bodied wine means that everybody in God's world is welcomed into this wine. And the new wine is bold flavors. It means it loves when you pop the tartness of citrus, and also when you have the chocolate and tobacco and earthy tones in your flavors. And the new wine has legs. If you're not a wine drinker, you may not know what that means, but if you swirl your glass of wine and if there are shoots of legs going up of that wine, that means you have a good wine. So the new wine has legs that can run, legs that can care for those who are left out in society, legs that can run to the border when a wall is being built and people are hungry, legs that can care for Black Lives Matter, and legs that can state LGBTQAI people are part of us and are leading with us, and legs that can run to all the edges of society and say, yes, you are us and we are you, come. The new wine has legs. And mostly the new wine has the aroma. The first thing you're supposed to do when you drink wine is sniff and smell. And we know in our tradition of Scripture that the aroma is the presence of God. So when we smell the aroma of God, we can feel God's presence and we follow God's presence because that is who we are. So I was thinking about all those things and asking myself, God, show us where this new baby is. Where does she live? What does she look like? And last week, I was in Denver with a group of people from all over our Western jurisdiction. And we were at this big church downtown, and they were giving us a tour of the church and the beautiful building, the old history, the 4,000 plus pipe organ, and we heard all about the building and the structure. And we also heard how, in order to survive, they had to sell all the land around them that was a parking lot at one time and now is part of downtown. And we heard that story, and then we walked about 3 or 4 blocks down to the park, which was, again, in central Denver, and we were helping a ministry that had been going on for a long time of caring for and feeding the homeless lunch in the park. And this ministry was started not by the church we walked from, but by a church that was about 30 or 40 miles out. Someone in that church had noticed these people. And so we were there at lunchtime. It was cold. It was in Denver. There was a little bit of snow on the ground. These people had been sleeping with sleeping bags and anything to cover them. And I was privileged to be able to serve communion. And they had this routine. So they would come through a line, and they would pass the communion station, and then they'd get their lunch and their water. And if after everybody got one, they could come around twice and get more. And so when they came to me and another pastor, Wendy, we offered them the communion, and about between a half and 2/3 took communion. It was really fun to watch them take communion. It wasn't. It was so meaningful. You could see it in their faces. You could see the emotions well up. One person came by and said, I can't take communion because I'm not Catholic. And I said, well, I'm not Catholic either. You can take communion. And his eyes lit up, and he grabbed that bread and dunked it in and went on by. Another person says, I can't take it because I don't drink wine. And I said, it's grape juice. She said, okay. She took communion, and you could see her soul light up. And another person came by, and he says, I can't take communion because I haven't been baptized. And he just kept on going. And then later on, he came around again, and he was kind of looking at us, and I said, do you want some? And he said, no, I haven't been baptized. And Pastor Wendy says, you don't have to be baptized. You can have communion. And so he had this look on his face like, really? And he took the communion, and he dipped it in, and he had a face full of emotion as he received communion. Later on, Wendy and I were talking to each other and said, why didn't we just ask him if he wanted to be baptized? We could have done that on the spot. You see, we were working with this ministry and receiving from them as much as they, probably more than they received from us. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is the new baby right here. This is where the church needs to be, out in the parks, away from the walls, to the places where the people are, to the places where Jesus would go, right? When we were meeting in Denver, we met in this other church that was a neighborhood church. And it was an old, looked like 60s style, typical church in a neighborhood, and A-frame. And they had taken this sanctuary, and they took all the pews out, and instead of pews, they put tables, like a big old farm table in the middle. They had a communion table, and then all the other tables were around, and they were set, ready for dinner, because they were having dinner church. So their church wasn't on Sunday mornings, it was like Thursday nights. People would come, and they would eat, have dinner, maybe have a short little devotion, share with each other around the table, receive communion, and go home. And that was church. And when I watched them coming in and out of the flow of conversation like you have in a restaurant, I thought to myself, this is it. This is baby church right here. This is what it looks like. And the other baby church I see is in my own town, in the basement of a church, where they have taken a place that wasn't being used and received guests who come out of detention. They've crossed the border, been in detention. They come with their children and parents, and we receive them there where they can have food and a place to sleep, a phone call to their families, and get ready to go to the next leg of their journey, which is into the United States, farther into where they can meet their family members. These folks have been on a journey for sometimes a couple of weeks and sometimes 3 months, 4 months. They sometimes ride the bus or the train, and sometimes they walk across 2, 3 countries in order to get to our border. And currently, when they get to our border, not only are they not let across as asylees, but they are told to stay in Mexico. And Mexico, I can tell you, is having a hard time caring for all the people that we have put out on their streets because we won't let them in. So they go to that, they finally get across, they are taken into the detention center where they are processed, and in the detention center, they understand that they are there to get their paperwork done and that they will be let out pretty soon. But in the detention center, it's cold, and they call the place in Spanish the ice box, which means like the refrigerator ice box, because it's so cold in there. And all they have are those silver astronaut blankets. So when they come to us, they're a little bit shell-shocked. So the other day, I went down to see how things were going and to talk to somebody who wanted to have a tour, and this father came up to me, and he was holding his little girl who was like 3 or 4 years old, and he was telling me about his journey, and the little girl reached out her hands to me. Of course, I had to reach out my hands and receive her, and she put her head on my shoulder, and she promptly, as Dad and I were talking, fell asleep. And Dad was telling me his story. He said, we've been on the road for about a month and a half, and we're tired, but we're glad that we're here, and thank you for this church doing what it does. And he said, we're going now to the next leg of the journey, and we pray that Mom and baby, who we had to leave behind at home, would come soon. And so then I understood that the little girl just needed a mama at that moment. And the truth be told is that this grandma needed that little girl at that moment too. And then I thought to myself, this is church. This is the new baby church right here. One time I was trying to figure out what she looks like, the new baby church, and I wrote this. What does she look like, this new life being born? She's beautifully diverse. She's malleable. She rides the wind of the Spirit. She detests Robert's rules and political maneuvers. Yeah. She's powerful and vulnerable. She lives in buildings and cafes and bars and on the street. She is fluid. She refuses to exclude one soul. She crosses borders with grace and strength. She mixes up the order for the good of creativity. She has the seed of Jesus and the shoot of Wesley. She will not suffer abuse anymore. She is colorful, including all the colors of the rainbow. She gathers, encourages, creates, heals, and sends. She centers with the humble, the poor, and the left out. She lives not by law, but by grace. She sits at table with strangers and loners and lost ones. She loses herself in love. She cares for the earth. She will do no harm. She is beautiful. So while we are in this period of time in our history of the United Methodist Church, imagining, recreating, reforming, remaking who God intends for us to be, let us not forget to stop and say, welcome to the world, baby church.